Now, I'm doing this as a follow-up to the video on Militia Tribunal for war crimes. I noticed a common theme in some of the comments that were being posted at YouTube and over at BitChute. And that theme was, this person is guilty, kill him on the spot, no trial needed. One person actually posted over at YouTube that under United Nations tribunal rules, no tribunal is required for the obvious or to hear commonly known things. So basically the United Nations thing is fuck them, guilty, no trial needed, kill them. Which, coming from them, I understand it, because that organization really does not recognize individual rights, individual freedoms. They really do look at everyone as being expendable. Everyone is a useless eater, as cannon fodder, and we should be eliminated as efficiently as possible without them getting their hands dirty. Now, here in America, we have certain God-given rights recognized in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. These rights do not disappear just because there is a conflict or a war going on. And I'm sure certain people that live down south that are patrons and subscribers are pointing out right now that, well, Lincoln did it. Well, he shouldn't have. I do consider that a major crime that he did in his presidency. It's a major black mark against him. The U.S. Constitution is absolute. It is the supreme law of the land, and we must recognize that. We must recognize those rights given to an individual, especially the accused. Now, we used to have a guiding principle in our jurisprudence in this country of innocent until proven guilty. Nowadays, it really doesn't exist. Guilt and innocence seems to be determined by how much money a person has. So if you're a poor person, you're fucked. If you're rich, you can get away with having an island with kidnapped children on them, using them as sex slaves, and you'll never see a day in jail. Or if you do, you know, you'll mysteriously commit suicide. But I realized a while ago, when I was helping out a friend to draw up some rules and regulations for his unit that he was forming at the time, that we should have some type of established procedure for when a crime occurs, because it will happen sooner or later. During a conflict, at some point, one of your people will do something that would be considered illegal even before the war occurred. So you need to establish procedures for determining guilt or innocence. What rights does the accused have? Now, that's where it comes into unit regulations. You should sit down with your people now, or at the very beginning of the conflict when you have the time, sit down, talk some things through, and write them down. What procedure should you have for determining guilt or innocence? Are you going to have just a single judge, or are you going to have an odd number of people as a tribunal where the vote of 2 of the 3 determines guilt? Maybe you'll have it in a rule that, well, you have to have 3 of the 3 in agreement in order for the death penalty to be served. But if that's the case, what type of incarceration can you do, realistically? So, you should have some basic procedures written down as your unit's regulations. And for guiding you for writing that up, coming up with your procedures, read the Bill of Rights. Read the amendments and try to read what you can on what the founders intended each amendment to mean. There is writings out there on it. You can go to different law schools. They have explanations and links to original writings so that you can look it over. Another thing that I recommend is the Uniform Code of Military Justice for the United States Armed Forces. They went back in the 1950s and wrote up a giant set of books covering crimes and conduct of people in the uniformed services of the United States during war and also peacetime. What's a crime? What isn't a crime? What's the recommended punishment? Look at that stuff. Things to consider. Another thing to look at is the international recognized laws of warfare. I know a lot of people say, well, I'm going to be a guerrilla, Geneva Convention doesn't apply. It should. Because remember, if you commit war crimes, the enemy is going to be more likely to commit them against you, or even more likely against innocent people, potentially your loved ones. Have some basis to go off of for when you're writing up your unit's rules, your unit's regulations. And the one thing that I say that should be above all of that is the Holy Bible, the Judeo-Christian ethic. And I'm not just talking eye for an eye type stuff. I'm talking compassion and mercy. Keep that in mind. Now I have some things that I wrote up here. Whatever you come up with for your group, you must recognize innocent until proven guilty. Unless you were there when the act was occurring, unless you know for certain that this person was saying, and you heard them saying that they're going to murder someone, and then you find them in the act doing it, slitting the person's throat, plunging the knife into their chest, putting the rifle to the back of their head, blowing their brains out as they're pleading for mercy. You need to have some type of investigation and a hearing to determine guilt. If you do catch someone in the act like that, you know they were going to do it. It's their personality. They are a murderer in their personality. Then I could maybe understand summary execution on the spot. As long as multiple people see the act happening. If it's just one person who sees it, that person should not perform the execution themselves, because how do we know that person isn't lying about why they shot that person? Why they shot the accused, the perpetrator? For all we know, the person who killed the potential perpetrator is the actual perpetrator, and they're covering it up. Now, whoever is in charge or part of the procedures for hearings must be impartial. So you don't want someone who's directly involved in the situation, someone who was one of the witnesses, or someone who the crime was committed against, or someone who is in the immediate leadership of the accused. So if it's an individual troop, you don't want their squad leader, their platoon sergeant or platoon leader to be the ones determining guilt. Not unless it's a really small unit and that's all you have. That's why I put in the tribunal the leaders of the company commander, the executive officer, the second in command, and the senior most non-commissioned officer, which in the U.S. Army is the first sergeant. 3 people. The people that are hearing the evidence at the hearing, that are determining guilt and innocence, should be at least one level separated from the accused and separated from any victim. So you don't want the person in charge of the hearing being the father or mother of a person that was killed or wronged. Now, you must allow for the presentation of evidence and witnesses, not just by the prosecution, but also by the defense. These are God-given rights that are recognized in the Constitution, as I said. And another thing that's in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, which I did not mention in that video, is prevention of double jeopardy. Double jeopardy is where you keep trying that person until you get the verdict you want. So the person is found innocent, not guilty, under the evidence. That's not the verdict you want, so you keep trying them again and again and again until you get a verdict of guilt and then the retribution that you want. That you can only try a person again if new evidence comes to life showing guilt. You cannot try a person again using the exact same evidence that they were found innocent on before. This also comes into appeals also, where someone was found guilty, new evidence comes to light showing innocence. That's when it goes back to court on an appeal and the verdict is reviewed. Now, I tried to make the tribunal video as vague as possible, and I should mention that because this was something that was asked by one of my patrons over at Patreon, this procedure was basically written up for just members of the unit, not for enemy personnel that are captured and convicted or investigated for war crimes. We'll have to come up with some completely different procedure for handling that one. But I'm going to give you some things here to consider on the case of PFC Millie. I got some scenarios that I thought of at work that could be in play inside that scenario. What if PFC Millie only went to the farm to steal food for himself or maybe the members of his team, and he was not aware that someone had already been at the farm and committed those other crimes? That bandits or whoever had already hit that farm, stole valuables, murdered the father and the mother. The daughter had not yet succumbed to whatever injuries she was given. She hadn't died yet. And that they are the ones that raped the mother and the daughter. PFC Millie maybe never even went in the house, never found the body of the murdered father, let alone the two females. Maybe all he was, you know, out in the field picking vegetables or taking it from, you know, the barn or wherever it was held. So he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when the search party went to look for him, and I didn't tell how long after he left the search party went out. There may not have even been enough time for him to commit those other crimes, but sufficient time for him to grab some food. And then he ran out of fear. Maybe he planned to get back to the unit. He wasn't planning to run away. But then as he was running, someone on that search party heard something in the brush. It's dark. They don't know what's there. They got scared. They started pulling the trigger. Some of those rounds were zipping through the leaves right past PFC Millie's head. And then he opened fire to defend himself. And then out of fear, he figured, well, I'm going to make my way towards the enemy since my people are trying to kill me for no reason. Things to think about. So the only real crime he committed was theft, which under that scenario video was hard labor as the punishment. He didn't commit the murders, didn't commit the rapes, so death penalty was not in play. He was defending himself by shooting back after he had been fired at first, so he was not attempting murder on a member of the resistance. Death penalty is not in play. He was running towards the enemy to ask for asylum, not with the intent of giving information about the unit. Death penalty is potentially not in play. Could be whatever you come up with your rules and regulations. Now here's the second scenario that I thought up. What if the whole thing was a setup? What if PFC Millie was told while he was on guard duty, go to the Gutierrez family farm, get some food. Arrangements had already been made with the owners of the farm for him to pick up the food. He was given a list. Get, the following items, they're in these areas ready for your pickup. He follows orders. He goes to pick up the food because he was ordered to go by a superior. Squad leader, platoon sergeant, platoon leader, whoever. Now, after he's been gone a little while, that leader then starts asking questions of, where is he? He's not doing guard duty. He left his post. We need to launch a search party. And then that leader with potentially accomplices decide they're going to be the ones that are going to search the farm while the others search other locations. And then while PFC Millie is at the farm, he gets found by the real perpetrators. To cover up their crime, they start shooting at him. He starts running. He returns fire. He defends himself. This entire thing is a setup to cast him as the perpetrator that committed the rapes, that committed the murders, while the real people that did it are the ones chasing him, trying to kill him to cover their tracks. Did any of you think of that? Or did you automatically assume that he was a dirtbag, guilty, and should have been killed on the spot? Did anyone consider the possibility he may have been innocent? How do we determine that innocence? The finding of evidence, an investigation, and a hearing. Sooner or later, one of your people, someone you know, may find himself in this situation, either set up or they may have actually committed the crime. How are you going to handle it? Things to think about. Don't be like our enemy. Mob rule. Who cares what the truth is? We have to appease the mob. Kill them, string them up right now. As long as someone is held accountable. Innocent until proven guilty. Things for you to consider. Sit down with your people if you haven't already. Start talking it through. How will you handle a murder? How will you handle a rape? How will you handle theft? How will you handle someone leaving their post on guard duty or falling asleep on guard duty? How will you handle a leader whose actions fall in the category of conduct unbecoming of an officer, conduct unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer? They sit off on the side, give all the orders, don't do any of the work, but they collect all the spoils. How are you going to handle it? Write up some basic rules, use some guides, establish your procedures now. I guarantee this is an area that 99% of the different militias, patriot groups, local defense groups have never even considered. But it is something that will come into play sooner or later. And that's all I have on this one. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember essayons.